The Mothman. It was a night that would haunt my dreams for years to come. A night when the supernatural and the mundane converged in a terrifying dance of terror. I was never one to believe in cryptids, those elusive creatures of legend, until that fateful evening in the woods of Virginia. The woods had always held a certain allure for me, a place of solitude and reflection. I often went hiking alone to escape the noise and chaos of the city. The moon was a mere sliver in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees as I trudged along the winding forest trail. It was a chilly October night, and the air was thick with the scent of decaying leaves. As I ventured deeper into the woods, a strange unease settled in the pit of my stomach. Branches cracked, leaves rustled, and the night seemed alive with unseen eyes, for now at least. My flashlight's feeble beam struggled to pierce the oppressive darkness. My heart quickened, and I was acutely aware of my isolation, or so I thought. I paused to catch my breath, and it was then that I heard it. A strange, guttural sound that echoed through the forest. It was a noise I couldn't place, a mix of a mournful wail and an otherworldly screech. Panic welled up within me, and I quickly turned off my flashlight, hoping to hide in the dark. But there, just beyond the reach of the moonlight, I saw the eyes. A towering figure with wings outstretched, perched on a branch high above the forest floor. It was like something out of a nightmare, with large, glowing red eyes, just like everybody described it. Its body was dark and twisted, with feathers that kind of glowed in the moonlight. Everything that I'd come to search for, the legends of the Mothman, they were true. I couldn't move, and I certainly couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, drowning out the sounds of the forest night. The creature's eyes never wavered from me, and I could feel an overwhelming sense of weirdness. It was like we were both unsure of each other, staring at each other's eyes and waiting for the first person to make a move. Suddenly, it unfurled its wings and took flight. The noise was deafening as it soared through the trees, creating a chilling rush of air. My paralysis broke, and I stumbled back, trying to escape the nightmare that had come to life and that I had went out to search for. Everything that you've heard of this legend is true. How people describe it, what it acts like, and how big it is, it's all true. I ran blindly through the woods, branches scratching at my face and thorns tearing at my clothes. The night seemed endless, and I feel like the creature was pursuing me relentlessly, even though it really wasn't. I think it had spread its wings because it felt threatened by me, and it didn't know what kind of threat I really was. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going with running, my breath ragged and my body on the brink of exhaustion. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I burst from the forest, back into the cool, open night. The Mothman noises had disappeared long before I stopped running, but I figured it was my best option to keep on going. I stumbled to my car and peeled out of there, leaving the terrifying encounter behind. That night forever changed me, and it certainly made me believe that cryptids may be real. Never will I ever discredit Mothman being real again. Wendigo Fingers. It was a frigid winter night in the heart of northern Canada, the snowfall muffling every sound except the crunch of my boots on the icy ground. I was only a young boy, alone in the wilderness after my father had sent me out to get wooden logs for the night. Now he was a great man, and he taught me everything I knew to this day. Just because he sent me out to get logs at night alone doesn't mean I wasn't trained properly, because I was. He always told me this was Wendigo territory, and he'd said I should never venture out here for long. But the allure of the unknown had been too strong to resist, and I found myself on the outskirts of the forbidden forest, my curiosity getting the better of me. As I trudged farther into the forest, the temperature dropped, and a sense of foreboding settled over me. The air grew heavy with an unnatural chill, and the silence was deafening. I knew I was alone, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't. Looking in front of me, past all the snowfall, a shadowy figure moved amongst the trees, its movements as silent as the falling snow. Its limbs were elongated and seemed to defy the laws of nature, and its eyes held a weird glint in them. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the creature from the stories my father had told me. Never venture out here for long. It was the Wendigo. From a distance, I watched in terror as it prowled through the woods, its gross form moving at an unnatural pace. Each step had taken it closer to a group of deer that didn't know that they'd came upon the Wendigo. The bony fingers reached out, and in an instant, the deer was no more. Its howl echoed through the night, a chorus of despair that I'd never heard and never have heard again. I crouched behind a tree, trying to make myself as small as possible, praying that the Wendigo wouldn't sense me. My heart pounded, and I could feel my pulse in my ears and neck. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to get as far away as I could, but fear had me rooted in my place, and thankfully it did. The Wendigo looked my way, and I watched, unable to tear my eyes away from the gruesome sight. Its skin seemed to stretch and contort, and its eyes never left the woods after that, scanning the area for potential threats. Minutes felt like hours as I remained hidden, and eventually it had went back into the woods to finish its feast. I went back home to my father after that, and told him of the encounter. He believed me. How could he not? These woods were massive, and there was most certainly something out there that we'd yet to see with our own eyes. Except, I had seen it with my own eyes. A tale of terror. My grandmother, Maria, had always been a storyteller, spinning tales of our family's history and the mysteries of our homeland. But there was one story she told, a tale of terror that haunted my dreams for years. It happened when she was a young woman, living in a remote village nestled in the heart of the Mexican countryside. The nights there were dark and quiet, punctuated only by the distant howls of coyotes. The villagers whispered of the chupacabra, a blood-sucking beast that prowled the night, and my grandmother had dismissed these stories as mere superstitions. One fateful night, as she laid in her bed with her infant daughter, a weird feeling washed over her. The air grew heavy, and the silence was broken only by the sound of her baby's cries. Maria got up, cradling her child in her arms, and ventured outside. She saw something moving amongst the roofs, straight into the field afterwards. It was no ordinary creature. It was hunched over, with hairless skin and glowing red eyes. It moved with an unnatural grace, like a predator stalking something. The chupacabra was real, and it was near. Terror surged through her veins as she watched it approach the village, its steps deliberate and menacing. The beast moved in and out of the village like a blurred figure, and it was disorienting to behold. My grandmother retreated into her home, clutching her child tightly, with her heart racing as she whispered prayers for protection. The chupacabra presence hung heavy in the air, and she could hear it moving through the village, with unnerving cries echoing through the night. For hours, she cowered with her child, trembling in fear and praying. She heard terrified screams of neighbors who had seen it, and animals being attacked. By dawn, the chupacabra had disappeared, leaving behind a trail of destruction. My grandmother's encounter haunted her for the rest of her life, and while she originally stated it was all superstition, she had seen the chupacabra from afar. Its presence had been all too real, and the memory of that night weighed heavily on her. She shared it with us as a warning, and a testament to the terrors that lurk in the dark, waiting to blur the lines between myth and reality. The harbor. It was a frigid, moonless night in the coastal town of Harbor's End. The bitter wind howled off the icy waters, and the deserted streets cast long shadows under the dim glow of streetlights. Rachel and I, both 15 years old at the time, were making our way home after a late movie. The town felt like a ghost town, with most residents choosing to stay indoors due to the biting winter cold. As we strolled along the deserted streets, the distant sound of dogs barking reached our ears. Rachel and I exchanged glances, puzzled by the notion that the canine noise could carry so far. We brushed it off as a mere curiosity and continued our walk home, yet an unsettling feeling began to gnaw at the edges of our minds. With each step we took, my unease grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched by something through the darkness, a potential threat even. Finally, as we reached a dimly lit street corner, something happened. Out of nowhere, a chilling rustle emerged from the shadow. Reacting on pure instinct, like anyone else would, we jumped backwards. Emerging from the bushes was a figure unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was taller than any man, easily exceeding 7 feet in height. It was also entirely white, as if it were crafted from a pale, unearthly material. Its hairless head had an almost otherworldly glow under the streetlight. Terror seized us both, and without uttering a word, we bolted. Rachel's voice pierced through the night, desperately yelling at me to wait. I didn't stop until I glanced back and saw what was chasing my friend and I. It was something indescribable, a grotesque being with elongated limbs and a hauntingly distorted visage. Despite the terror that gripped our hearts, we were hometown kids who knew these streets like the backs of our hands. We zigzagged through the alleyways and shortcuts, hoping to outmaneuver whatever was pursuing us. The adrenaline surged through our veins as we darted in and out of alleyways. Then, we finally found a deserted building site to hide in. We hid in silence, our breaths heavy and panicked, waiting for what felt like hours. The only sounds were our hearts pounding in our chests and the cold, desolate wind that whistled through the empty structure. Finally, we mustered the courage to venture out and make a run for our homes. That night, we returned safely, with our hearts still racing and our minds filled with wonder of what that was. We never spoke about what we'd seen again, but the image of that tall, hairless, white figure is hard not to recollect. The Southwest. In the arid, desolate landscape of the Southwest, the sun dipped below the horizon. My friend Dave and I had arranged to meet up with a couple of fellow adventure seekers. We wanted to explore a remote cave rumored to hold untold mysteries. The remote location meant their journey was already fraught with unease, and as darkness descended, their anticipation was mixed with trepidation. As the minutes turned to hours, the absence of their companions began to gnaw at them. Dave contemplated whether the friends of ours had decided to venture into the cave without us. Determined to catch up, we set off for the cave, with our flashlights cutting through the dark. The cave's entrance was ominous, its mouth yawning like a gaping maw. There was also just plain silence in the air, which made everything way creepier than usual. Random echoes would bounce off the cavern walls, so we would feel like we were never alone. As we explored deeper into the cave, the sense of foreboding grew more pronounced. Our instincts told us to flee, but our experience told us to stay. We eventually retreated, telling ourselves that it was a good idea to do so. But as we reached the cave entrance, Dave froze. He looked up and was met with a sight that defied all reason. A humanoid creature with the body of a man and the weird appearance of a bat. Its leathery wings unfurled, blotting out the feeble moonlight that filtered into the cave. Its eyes bore into my soul, a piercing, predatory stare that made me want to curl up in a ball. While Dave tugged at my arm, I finally snapped out of the trance. and we sprinted back to the truck with screeches echoing behind us. This night had become a nightmare, and we had no intention of staying a part of it. Our truck roared to life, tires kicking up dust and gravel as we sped away from the cursed vicinity. Our ordeal was far from over, because as we raced through the desert, we saw an owl by the side of the road. Its unblinking eyes followed us with an unnatural intensity, and it felt like an omen, and a bad one at that. Our hearts raced faster as we continued driving. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, and our minds, now a chaotic jumble of fear, made us feel like this night was all made up. Now we have the non-stop memory of a creature that we're damn sure wasn't a part of any book or TV show. It was something real. The Churchyard. Around 10:30 in the evening, my sister and I embarked on a late-night walk. Our path led us through a quiet churchyard and then across some desolate fields. We relished the tranquility and serenity of the night, its stillness broken only by the soft leaves and distant chirping of crickets. As we approached an enclave in the next field, the serene atmosphere was abruptly shattered by a sound so unnatural. The scream that pierced the silence was unlike anything we'd ever heard before. It defied categorization, a horrific fusion of high-pitched and guttural tones. It was like a human scream intermingled with agony of a dying animal. The hair on the back of our necks stood on end. We ended up pushing forward. Despite the creeping fear that coursed through our veins, our path was eventually blocked by a hedge, obstructing our view of whatever lurked beyond it. We exchanged uneasy glances, but our desire to understand the source of this unearthly scream compelled us to proceed. We decided to peer over the hedge. Standing there, a sinister silhouette loomed before us. This tall and crooked creature looked like a human and something else entirely. Its hunched back contorted as if it was weighed down by different intentions, and its head stretched forward. Its mouth had jagged, serrated teeth that looked like they were able to cut into anything. We gasped, frozen by the nightmarish vision before us. This abominable being was neither fully human nor animal. We were paralyzed by fear, and we could do nothing but watch this figure lurch closer to us. Eventually, it screamed at us, and we immediately fled. We ran as if our lives fully depended on it, and in that moment, they probably did. We ran through the churchyard, past the fields, and beyond. Thankfully, it didn't follow, but part of me thought it did, and it was just waiting for the right time to show itself. Big steps. The forest stretched out before us like an endless sea of towering trees and underbrush. My friends and I had embarked on a weekend hiking adventure, far away from the city's noise and chaos, seeking solace in the wilderness. Our destination was a remote and little visited trail in the heart of the Cascade Mountains, where untouched nature held its way. On the second day of our trek, as we ventured deeper into the woods, we encountered a trail that seemed less traveled than the one we'd been following on. The path was narrow, tangled with thick undergrowth, and it piqued our curiosity. We decided to abandon our original plan and follow this new winding trail that led us farther into the heart of the forest. The hours passed by in a blur of awe-inspiring scenery, and the soothing sounds of the forest continued. We hiked through dense groves of towering trees, crossing crystal-clear streams, and encountered a variety of wildlife. Everything from chipmunks to birds of prey, you name it. Our spirits were high, and the sense of adventure pushed us deeper into the woods. As the afternoon sun began to cast shadows behind the trees, we found ourselves in a particularly secluded and dense part of the forest. The narrow trail was overgrown, and the trees loomed like silent sentinels. It was then that I began to notice an unusual stillness in the woods. The birds had fallen silent, and a hush hung in the air. My friends shared my unease, and we exchanged knowing glances. We'd all heard the legends and tales of the wild, and the stories of cryptids that roamed these untamed lands. We'd chuckled at the campfire stories, dismissing them as mere folklore, but the sense of disquiet that had settled over us was undeniable. We continued down the trail with our senses on high alert. Then, in the distance, a figure, large and shaggy, moved through the underbrush. At first, I dismissed it as a bear or some other large animal, but the way it moved was different. It was upright, bipedal, and as soon as it emerged from the underbrush, we realized it was no ordinary creature. The sight of it made me want to go into immediate hiding. It was enormous, standing at least 8 feet tall, with a body covered in thick, dark hair. Its head turned slightly as it moved, and its eyes, which appeared to gleam with an otherworldly intelligence, locked onto us. The creature's presence was overwhelming, and its eyes seemed very fixed on us. The hikers in our group froze, unable to comprehend what was before us. The forest had given birth to a creature that defied all rationality. It moved with a grace, but it looked like a human and an animal. We remained rooted to the spot, our hearts pounding in our chests. The forest had become an otherworldly realm, and this cryptid was the keeper of its secrets. We watched as it moved further into the woods, disappearing from our view, but nobody would believe us on what we saw. With our nerves on edge, we debated on following this Bigfoot-like creature. We decided it'd be best not to pursue something that was much bigger than us, so we finally backed off and went the way we came. The legend of the Bigfoot-like creature in these woods became more than folklore that day. It became a chilling reality, and one that even I'm afraid to believe. The Northwest. In the heart of the dense, unforgiving wilderness, our small expedition team ventured into the vast, uncharted forest. The day was marked by the quiet as we ventured into the Pacific Northwest. We embarked on a journey to look for the Bigfoot, this giant mountain creature that people said was a massive, hairy behemoth, and unlike any other creature. My crew and I had heard whispers and stories from indigenous people of the region about this creature, but we weren't prepared for what we would encounter later that night. We were skeptical, but we were also curious and determined. Our camp was set up in a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees. The advisors in our group were experienced wilderness experts, while the rest of us were seasoned explorers, believing we'd seen it all. As day turned into night, an unsettling feeling settled over the camp. Strange noises carried through thick underbrush, and we just all felt weird. My crew had heard them too, but who was I to tell them? I claimed it was just a wild boar, because that would be the most common occurrence in these woods. But the only thing is, there's no boar up there, and the advisors knew I was lying, but they didn't call my bluff. After dinner, they went to the tents, and I retired to my hammock about 50 yards from the camp. As a rule, I always set my hammock at my head height, about 6 feet up. This helps keep away creatures who may be able to reach me on the ground. I would use a tarp over my body and had to keep the morning dew off. Not only that, but mosquitoes would be incredibly bothersome, so it helped keep them at bay. But that night, the tarp wasn't strung up. It was just loosely over me. I convinced myself it was the unseasonably warm night, and I didn't want to feel trapped. It must have been around 3 or maybe 4 a.m. when I was awakened by what sounded like a woman sobbing. Not an outright cry, but a soft, mournful sob. At the same time, I could hear something walking through the thick brush down past my feet. I remained still, my breath held, as it crossed into the camp. I could hear the distinct transition from the rustling of brush to the cold, hard granite rock beneath. The heavy, labored footsteps continued to draw nearer, right towards me. I laid paralyzed with fear as the footsteps grew louder. The sobbing was now so close, and I could almost feel the presence of whatever it was. The tarp over my head kept me blind to what was happening around me. adding to the sense of scaredness. In no time, it was standing right next to me, and I could feel the immense presence hovering over my hammock. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to steady my breath, even though every instinct screamed at me to flee. The sobbing continued, and it felt as if time itself had come to a standstill. Out of nowhere, a large growl erupted from the being, and the ground beneath my hammock vibrated with immense power. I could smell its acrid, earthy scent, a mixture of wet moss and damp fur. It seemed as though the creature I was looking for, the Bigfoot, had found me, but its intentions remained a mystery. I dared not make a sound, hoping that by remaining perfectly still, it would lose interest and leave me alone. The long, agonizing minutes passed, but eventually the sobbing and growling subsided. The footsteps receded into the forest, leaving me trembling in the dark. I laid in my hammock, unable to sleep, and the rest of the night dragged on as the unknown creature continued to roam around the campsite. When first light broke, I cautiously peered out of my hammock. The camp was in disarray, and my fellow expedition members had gathered, their faces etched with fear and confusion. The advisors, who had heard the events of the night, finally acknowledged the truth we'd all known but were afraid to admit. The Bigfoot was real, and it was far more terrifying than any legend or story could convey. The Pinegrove. I'd chosen a secluded campsite in the heart of the vast and untamed Pinegrove forest. Nestled in a serene valley, my campsite offered a commanding view of the surrounding woods, a meandering trail leading to a serene creek, and the prospect of a peaceful night. One morning, the sun's first rays pierced through the thick forest canopy, and I decided to venture out for a hike. As I left my campsite at 6:45 a.m., I couldn't help but admire the breathtaking natural splendor that surrounded me. The campsite sat perched on a ridge, allowing me to graze across the verdant expanse below. However, my tranquil morning was disrupted by a sight I could hardly believe. From my elevated vantage point, about 200 feet away, I saw a creature that defied explanation. It seemed to materialize from the depths of the woods, its presence sending shivers down my spine. At first, my mind played tricks on me. I thought I was seeing a majestic deer, an elegant creature with a dark mane of hair. The creature's body was facing me, its head turned slightly to the left, but as I continued to watch in amazement, the figure before me defied any logical explanation. The creature's size grew with each passing moment, expanding from what I initially believed to be a young deer into a colossal, towering presence. The creature's movements were what truly set it apart. It wasn't a deer, and it certainly wasn't anything I'd seen in this forest. This enigmatic being, now standing between 7 to 8 feet tall, turned its head in uncanny precision, directing its gaze towards me. It then altered its course, moving eastward with a deliberate and unhurried pace. Its motion was captivating, walking on two legs, its back slightly forward, and its arms hanging naturally by its side. The creature made its way across the parking lot, heading for a bridge that spanned the nearby creek. I watched as the figure vanished into the thick underbrush on the other side of the creek. In the aftermath of this encounter, I felt compelled to search for evidence that would confirm what my eyes had just witnessed. I scoured the ground for any sign of footprints, hoping to validate the existence of this unearthly entity. Regrettably, the terrain was too hardened to yield any clue, and my efforts proved fruitless. I crossed the bridge and ventured north along the creek, my senses on high alert. My diligent search was met with silence, as the forest seemed to keep its secret locked away. Skinwalker Ranch. I never thought I'd find myself at Skinwalker Ranch, a place infamous for strange occurrences and weird legends. It was a place I'd always been curious about, but nothing could have prepared me for this experience that awaited. As I walked the desolate grounds of the ranch, the air grew thick with an unexplainable tension. The sky above was overcast, casting a gloomy pallor over the forsaken landscape. My boots crunched on the gravel path, the only sound to break the silence. I'd heard countless stories of inexplicable phenomena here, from UFO sightings to cryptid encounters, but I never truly believed them until that day. I'd come here to investigate, to document the strange occurrences that had made Skinwalker Ranch so infamous. My camera dangled from my neck, ready to capture any evidence of the paranormal. Little did I know that I would soon become part of the very story I was trying to unravel. As I explored the ranch, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The surrounding trees seemed to twist and writhe with a sinister energy, and the rustling leaves sounded like whispers of intent. I thought of turning back, but my curiosity pushed me forward. It was then that I saw it, a figure in the distance. It moved with an uncanny grace, too fluid and too silent to be human. My heart pounded as I focused my camera on the approaching silhouette. The creature had the form of a man, but its movements were animalistic, almost predatory. The closer it got, the more I realized that something was terribly wrong. Its skin was mottled and dark, like a rotting corpse. Its eyes glowed with a yellow light, and its face twisted into a grotesque mockery of a smile, revealing sharp teeth. The stench of decay filled the air, and my instinct screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place. The Skinwalker advanced with an unnatural speed, and our eyes locked. I felt its presence, its intent to consume me, to steal my very identity. I tried to cry out, to scream for help, but my voice got caught in my throat. The world around me warped and distorted, and I felt as if I was losing myself. In that moment of paralyzing terror, I realized the Skinwalker was not just stalking me, it was hunting me. It wanted to wear my skin, to become me. It wanted to make me a part of the twisted legends that surrounded Skinwalker Ranch. Just when I thought I'd be consumed by the creature, it had disappeared. Everything was back to normal, and I was left trembling, my camera still pointing at the ground where the Skinwalker had been. I could hardly believe what had transpired, and I'm sure you won't believe me either. I stumbled back from the scene, my heart racing, and made a hasty retreat towards the Skinwalker Ranch. The legends were true, and I had come face to face with the Skinwalker, a creature of the dark that wanted to prey on me. Nestled Woods. I'd ventured into the wilderness to escape the stress of city life, to find solitude among the shadows and the silence, but the solitude had become oppressive, and the shadows seemed to harbor bad intentions. I quickened my pace, my footsteps echoing like distant drum beats in the silence of the night. I stopped at a small clearing and gazed around, my breath visible in the cold air. The moonlit forest was still, except for the faint rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. My heart pounded in my chest, as if it too sensed the lurking evil. That's when I first saw it, a figure in the distance, moving among the trees. It was as if the night itself had taken human form. My heart leaped into my throat, and I hid behind a tree, peering through the leaves. The figure drew closer, revealing a tall, gaunt shape draped in tattered, pale rags. Its movements were jerky, inhuman, and its skin seemed to shimmer. I watched in terror as it turned its head towards me, with its eyes glowing. It had no features, just empty, soulless sockets where its eyes should be. My breath caught in my throat, and my limbs froze, and I was paralyzed by fear. It took a step closer, and I felt its presence like a weight on my chest. It knew I was here. Its gaze bore into me, and I could sense its hunger for my fear. My heart thundered in my ears as I stepped out behind the tree and made eye contact with the creature, hoping to confront my fear, stupidly. But as soon as our eyes locked, the creature took off, vanishing like thin air. The terror of that encounter lingered, etched into my very soul, as I realized I'd been stalked by something that seemed like a skinwalker. My friends never believed me, and I can't blame them for that. But all I know is that I'm never gonna venture into the woods alone again. Gas station. The gas station sat in solitude, far from any signs of civilization, and I had a long, desolate stretch of highway ahead of me. I was going on a road trip to visit my friends, so I got out of the car and had to get gas, as I had no idea how far the next gas station was ahead of me. The place seemed abandoned, like the air was thick with silence and nobody was around at all. I glanced at the empty pumps and wondered if the station was even open, but my fuel gauge was plummeted dangerously low. It was now or never at this point. I approached the convenience store, its glass door covered in a thin layer of grime. With a hesitant push, the door creaked open. A bell chimed above me, announcing my presence. The interior was dimly lit, and rows of dusty snacks and expired goods lined the shelves, the same stuff that was in most gas stations. Behind the counter stood a clerk, a wiry man with hollow eyes and a weathered face, who watched me with an unsettling intensity. "Need some gas?" he asked in a raspy voice. I nodded and held up my credit card, trying to avoid eye contact with him, because it was quite unsettling. The man took it without a word, and he began the transaction, his eyes never leaving mine. As the transaction processed, I felt a strange sensation of being watched, not just by the clerk, but by something else. I turned my head to scan the store's dim interior, and behind me was a man lurking near the slushy machine. I wondered if the clerk had seen it all, and if he was going to do anything about this man who had his eyes also set on me. I took a step back, looking at the man by the slushy machine, trying to grab my credit card and get out of the place as quick as possible. He took a step towards me, and another, and another. Something was so off about him, as his hood hid most of his features. The clerk also acting unexpectedly weird, with both of them in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, just looking at each other in an empty gas station. Something wasn't right here. So as soon as those boots came upon me, I grabbed the credit card and ventured back to my car. As I exited, I heard the bell of the door once again, and then once more, as something followed me outside. I'd finally reached my car. I slammed the door shut and floored the gas pedal, leaving the gas station far behind. As I sped away, I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man lurking in the distance, but there was something different, something completely strange. I saw two glowing red eyes in my rearview mirror, and that's when I continued looking forward, never looking back again.